Chairman's Breakfast is the chairman of the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber, Carl Edwards.
Thank you. A number of you are still eating. Please continue. We are going to go ahead with the rest of our program, and I'm honored to introduce Congressman James Lankford today. James Lankford was elected to the United States Congress on November 2nd, 2010. Before his election, he directed Falls Creek Youth Camp from 1996 to 2009. Congressman Lankford serves on the Budget, Transportation and Infrastructure, and Oversight and Government Reform Committees, where he is the chairman of the Subcommittee on Technology, Information Policy, Intergovernmental Relations, and Procurement Reform. Not sure I can even get all the names right. While serving in Congress, he continues to work diligently studying the issues facing Congress and their impact on Oklahoma. Congressman Lankford has emerged as a leader in fighting government regulations that are suffocating business, including EPA regulations on the energy industry and the negative impact of regulations on banks and financial institutions. Congressman Lankford has been married to his wife Cindy for 19 years. Together they have two daughters, Hannah and Jordan. Please welcome Oklahoma Congressman from District 5, Congressman James Lankford.
Well, good morning. I will have some just brief remarks, try to catch all up on what's happening in Washington, D.C., and then I'm going to field questions, which I know is a dangerous thing to do. But they'll have some microphones scattered around, so if you've got a question, this would be a good time just to drift off and not think about what I'm saying and just think of your question, and then we'll field it from there. I do appreciate the kind comments that several folks have made. I don't believe them at this point, but I do appreciate them, and glad to be able to have just the encouragement of folks and the trust of that. Let me mention a couple things, and for me, I want to catch you up on things that are happening in D.C. and just try to give you some of the perspective firsthand of what's going on. You may have heard we're in the conversation again about another government shutdown. That is true and not true. There was never a serious conversation about this being a government shutdown in this. That was a self-manufactured, media-manufactured whole crisis. What happened was the Senate has still not done a budget for this year. The House passed a budget in April. The Senate has now, we're at 880 days, I think, since they passed a budget. So because of that, the fiscal year ends the 30th of September. We've got to be able to have an extension on that. We had already agreed during the debt ceiling talks and know how much fun those were. We'd already agreed during the debt ceiling talks on what's called the top line number for the next year. So the dollar amount was never an issue for us. Trying to get into the next one. Getting into the next year, the big issue was disaster relief funding. With the hurricane that came through and the earthquakes and all the fires that are going on and random things that are happening all over the country, there's a need for disaster relief funds. Well, disaster relief funds in the past have always been something that's been done on a supplemental budget. You have the budget, then a disaster occurs, and the House and the Senate pass a bill to do additional funding for disaster relief, but no offset for it. It's always debt spending. Well, in the House, we came back during the CR and said, okay, we're doing a CR anyway to extend out since the Senate's not done the budget. We're also going to do a piece for the disaster relief fund, but we're going to offset it. We're going to find an area where we can actually, a fund that's not being used, and to be able to tap that $1.5 billion to be able to offset the disaster relief fund. The Senate was furious about it because that's not the way it's done. You do disaster relief funding because it's a disaster and you just go into debt, and that's how you do it. Well, in the House, we're determined to, as many ways as we can, structurally making changes. Things like the debt ceiling vote. The structural change in the debt ceiling vote was, as much as we put into debt ceiling, we also have to offset that in the 10-year budget window. Now, the dirty secret of that is, if we do that 10 times in a row, we're in balance. Now, think about that for a second. If every time we get up to a debt ceiling vote, we also say this has to be paid for over that 10-year window and stick to that, we'll start catching up to that, and it will balance out. So for us, it was a structural change to say, can we do something to start this process of getting us down the road? The same thing for disaster relief funding. We know there are going to be disasters and such come up. We'd like to, number one, budget for it, which is what we did in the House, is to say we usually have about $2.5 billion worth of disasters. It's amazing to us that we plan our disasters so efficiently that we can target a number for it. But say, instead of that being debt spending every time, let's put it into the budget. That we have a set-aside rainy day fund that is exclusive for this, and then it carries over. So we can get a chance to bill for some years that we have fewer disasters, or for some years that we have more, we have that fund carrying over. So we started that process on it, but in the meantime, we've said disaster relief funding should be offset. That if we have something, it has to be paid for. The Senate didn't like that idea at all. In fact, they came back and said, no, we want to do $7 billion of disaster funding, and it not be offset. We rejected that and said, no, we really think the FEMA's needs are about $1.5 billion is what we're picking up from them, and we did that with the offset. Went over to the Senate, they tabled it, then all the conversations that happened yesterday. Do you know what the final result was? The administration came back and worked with Harry Reid in the Senate and said, we would rather have no additional disaster relief funds. We'll cover the disaster from other funds and other accounts, rather than start a process of an offset being done for disasters. So the Senate did a bill yesterday and when the week before they had said FEMA desperately needs $7 billion, yesterday they came back and said nothing is needed now. No more additional funds are needed for disaster because we'd rather not have offsets as the process shifts. Now, that doesn't go away because in a few months it's going to come back again. We will push that again as well and say this is just basic economics, that we should be able to make decisions saying let's do things that are going to be planned for the next generation, not just doing what is easiest for this generation. That has been the battle of this Congress. I do want you to know there are a lot of good folks that are there. Now, I know there are about 40 people that are on TV all the time, about 20 from each side, and they get on TV a lot by being some of the loudest voices, sometimes very sharp, sometimes not very sharp. But they end up on TV a lot, and so you get this impression that's what the other 435 are like because those 40 are on there all the time. I want you to know there's about 395 that are not on TV all the time, but they're trying to actually do a lot of work. There are some really good folks. Now, some of them I very much disagree with, but we're trying to actually get some work done. So I say that to you to give you some picture of hope, to say there are some folks that are actually trying to get some things finished. Now, let me mention some things in the jobs plan. Have you heard there's been some conversation about jobs lately? There is a very different set of opinions on this. One set of opinions says we need another stimulus plan. We did a $1 trillion stimulus plan. Now let's do a $500 billion stimulus plan and see if it can be twice as effective for half as much money. With all the dynamics that go with that. That plan is really not moving. In fact, it's fascinating to me. The president continues to say, and you'll find with me, I don't speak derogatory towards the president. I have respect for the office. We do disagree on a lot of things. But it's fascinating to me. The president continues to say, pass my bill, pass my bill, pass my bill. Did you know the president's legislation has not been filed yet by a Democrat? It's not been dropped in the House. The bill is done. It's not been dropped in the House. No one has said, I will sponsor this legislation and file it. Fascinating to me. This goes back to the president's budget that was filed in February. When it went to the Senate for a vote, the president's budget, it failed 97-0. Not a single Democrat voted for the president's budget. So it is an interesting time for the president, even with his own party, in trying to balance out how do we get proposals out from here. There are some aspects, though, of the president's plan that are good. I have to say, just from my own personal perspective. The free trade aspects of it needs to be done. It needed to be done a long time ago. But the plans that are out there for Colombia and Panama and South Korea do provide us more opportunities and do provide a balanced agreement between those countries to be able to expand trade. That's a positive thing. The president has a proposal in there about unemployment insurance, something I've been talking about for a while. I very much agree with in the concept. Now, we've got to work out the details. We have some differences in details. But remember way back in the day when we had 26 weeks of unemployment? Then it moved to 56 weeks. In the last 2 years, it's been 99 weeks. There was no structural change in that. It was just additional checks for people that don't have employment. Now, I have to tell you, I have great compassion for people that have long-term unemployment. But sending someone a check for 2 years and providing no incentive to go pursue employment is not the way to get that accomplished. To have some way, to having some incentive to be able to work off that, whether that be job skill training, whether it be transitional programs, whatever that may be, to have people move off of an unemployment check and back into employment in any level, even if that is volunteer employment, that they are staying engaged in the community, not sitting idle. The worst thing someone can do in an unemployment situation is to sit idle and not stay engaged with their community and not keep their skills up. So the transition to that program, something the President's talked about in his jobs plan, I think is a great idea, and I think it's an area we can find common ground. Once you leave that, it gets tougher to be able to find areas where we have common ground. There are some things I think that can be done, though. I've been very focused on taking to our leadership what I'm calling low-cost, no-cost things that can be done for the economy. I'm a firm believer that capitalism on its own expands. Businesses want to hire people, they want to expand, they want to go into new markets, they want to be able to grow their companies. That's what companies do. That's the nature of an organic organization. They're going to continue to expand. If that is not occurring, I want to ask the question, why not? Because on its own, when it's healthy, it will do that. So if it's not occurring, why? What can we look at as a federal government and say, those are the aspects that are slowing down the economy, let's pull those aspects off the economy and so it can take off again. So whether it be some of the regulatory environment, and boy, are there a stack of regulations that are lining up, or whether it be the rules that are coming down on banking. Community banks have now 100 new rules off of Dodd-Frank just this fall. From the 22nd of July to the 31st, 100 new rules coming down on them. Lots of ways that are slowing down basic commercial and residential lending. Residential lending that used to take 30 days now takes 90. Well, that's an improvement. You know, we've got things like that, just one after another. If you're going to invest in any kind of energy, I mean, what energy would you invest in currently? I mean, if you're going to take a long-term 10-year plan for investment and say, okay, what are we going to try to do in the next 10 years on this? Which one would you take a gamble on? I mean, every aspect of it encourages businesses to sit on the sidelines and wait and just say, let's wait this out until it's done. We've got to be able to pull some things off. Here's a crazy idea. Right now, we punish companies based in America that also do business in other countries. When they bring their money back from the other country that they're making a profit, and by the way, profit is what businesses do. Okay, that's supposed to be a goal, not something you'd be punished for. So if you make money in another country and you bring it back, you're taxed again. You're taxed in that country and you're taxed in this country on it. Well, that's ridiculous. We're the only country in the world that does that. Why would we do that? We punish our companies for doing business around the world. We should be encouraging that. And when they bring their business back to here, we want them to be based in Oklahoma. We want them to be based in the United States. And because this is where you're going to spend the most money. Where you're based, you're also going to invest the most, both in your community and in the company itself. Well, great. Well, don't discourage that. Basic repatriation of funds. In fact, a complete shift in how we do the tax code would be even better. To move from a global taxation system to a territorial taxation system would incentivize our companies to be able to do business all over the world and bring their money back home. Those are simple things to be able to do. They don't cost us a dime, but they encourage companies to be able to go back out and hire. Now, that doesn't even get close to dealing with things like the President's health care plan and some of those things that also have dramatic effects on what's going on. But those are issues, quite frankly, we're not going to be able to move in the next year. The President and the Senate are deadlocked that this is the greatest idea ever. I do disagree on that, and I think it is providing us a tremendous amount of instability in insurance, in health care, in basic employment. All of them are asking the question, what is about to happen? And no one can answer that question. No one. So that doesn't provide for a stable environment for it. Let me mention one other thing, I guess one thing in one story. Last week, we sent a bill through my committee that I'm chairing, which has been funny to me. I'm a unique duck in the sense that I came in a class of 96 freshmen total, 87 of those being Republicans, but 96 freshmen. With that, we have a third of the Republican conference, and a lot of the senior members, as you walk through the process, they've been committee chairmen at different points and are still there, and a lot of the folks that were in line for that just transitioned out, and so they were in the unique situation that a few freshmen were going to have to chair committees. I'm sure the leadership swallowed hard and thought, holy cow, what are we doing? Okay, we're stuck at a spot that we're going to have to turn over the gavel to some rank amateurs in this. I ended up being one of those rank amateurs that got handed a gavel to be able to chair a committee, but it's been interesting to be able to walk through the process of trying to move the legislation through it. We walked through a piece last week called the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act. It's a simple piece. It begs the question, in fact, where's Patrice Douglas? Right there. We tapped on Patrice. We did 3 different hearings earlier this year, and now almost former Mayor Patrice, when she, as mayor of Edmond, we were doing hearings on What is the effect of federal mandates on counties, cities, and states? And what are federal mandates? How are they coming down on businesses? And how do we get control on those? Patrice came as one of those hearings and did a great job in the testimony in the hearing on it, representing cities in Oklahoma and across the nation actually for it. But it was interesting as we compiled all this data that we found multiple different areas. And so we're designing a system that may sound just geekish, but I think it'll work. And what it does is it requires for every vote that happens and every unfunded mandate that we pass down in Congress, which there are quite a few, as they come through the process, they're scored by CBO, but then we would have to have 2 votes on each piece before they come through before the House. One would be what's called it's a long procedural thing, but basically we'd have to vote on recognizing this is an unfunded mandate, and I know it is. So they'd bring up the score, here's the amount of the unfunded mandate. The House has to vote saying, we know this is an unfunded mandate, we're voting for it anyway. And then later you finish out the debate and then have to vote again for the bill itself. So the sponsor of the bill has to be a sponsor of a piece tagged an unfunded mandate. The whole House has to vote twice on every unfunded mandate as it comes to the House. Now technically it doesn't change the capacity of Congress to do that. But you know how toxic that would be? To actually passing a bill. It also has to go through the same system for the regulatory environment. Currently in regulations, the regulators are doing interim final rules. So they don't have to go through the full process of proposed rulemaking and go through all the public comment and everything. They'll just do an interim final rule and say it's an emergency, we've got to work this through. Well, this would not exempt that group. And they would have to go through the same process on it, and it would also provide this unique feature to it. It would provide judicial review to every company. That if a regulator does not follow the structure and they lay down an unfunded mandate, any company could actually hold them account through the courts separate from the agency that proposed it. Now that's a dramatic shift because currently right now, if you have a problem with the regulation, you know who you complain to? Somebody in the next cubicle in that same agency that made the regulation, that's who you complain to. There is no outside review of that for most of them. And so we're creating an outside element of a third party to be able to say they can come back and review it and put a stay on it. We just worked that through our subcommittee. It's going to the full committee this fall, onto the House floor, and try to begin to push that on. Now, am I convinced yet that the Senate's going to pass it? I'm sure Harry Reid will love it. I'm going to be optimistic. But when we win the Senate back in a year, this will be set up and be ready to go. And to be able to take this through a process and to say, what structurally can we change to be able to make the shift on it? I do have this optimistic view because as a nation, we've been through very, very tough times before. We're all very aware of that. But I've got to tell you, when I sit in the House chamber, and I've had a lot of people say to me, do you get frustrated? And I smile and say, do you? Okay, I'm even closer to it. And yes, there are very frustrating moments. But when I sit in the House chambers, it's very interesting to me. I don't know if you can see it in a lot of the pictures of the House, but directly above the Speaker's dais, in big gold letters, is our national motto, "In God We Trust." And I sit in the House chambers, and it reminds me again, man is not the one that I trust in. And as a nation, we determined in the 1950s, this is fascinating, many of you know this history, but in the 1950s, coming out of World War II, and all the turmoil that was happening in the rapid rise of communism, and it had every appearance worldwide as communism spread very rapidly and very violently around the world, that our nation was reflecting on who we are and how that is different than communism. And what they determined in the 1950s, in 1954 in the vote to be able to change, to mark all of our currency and all of our coins with "In God We Trust." You know, we've had on our coins since 1861, "In God We Trust," but we shifted that to our currency as well in 1954. But to tag all of our currency with "In God We Trust," and then to make that as a part of our national motto, and to be able to put "Under God" in the Pledge of Allegiance, all that happened in 1954, 55, and 56. As we're building the interstate highway system and expanding across the country in 1956, we were also saying to the world, communism is spreading, and communism has one trust: man can create a perfect society. If we were to expand far enough and require equality broad enough, man can create a perfect environment. And we as a nation said we do not believe man creates perfect environments. In God we trust. And it was a direct affront to communism spreading worldwide to say our nation will be different. And I do not believe that has changed to this day. That there's still a need for us as a nation to say, I know the frustrations we're dealing with. But it is not in Congress we trust. It's not in the President and the Supreme Court that we trust. It's still in God we trust. And there's still a difference in the basic foundational freedoms that we have, that we believe our freedoms do not come from man, they come from our Creator. And that's different. So I say, in all the turmoil, and when it's so easy to say, holy cow, those guys have no idea what they're doing. We have no idea what we're doing. But don't put your trust in us. We're going to try to put our trust in the same place you put yours. And understand God's shepherded our nation for a long time. It's time for us to get back to work. And so let me take some questions for a little while. I think I left us a couple minutes at least. Okay, if you've got questions or people wander around, poke a microphone in your face, just one right here. There you go.
Hi, I'm Sharon Freeney.
Hi,
I am
Sharon.
a Republican. I voted for you. Turns out you didn't need my vote, but...
Hey, I'll take it.
Okay. I just wondered, I probably am more politically in tune than a lot of people here, but I'm still totally confused. I hear Republicans say one thing, I hear Democrats say another, and I'm sure they are honest, good guys. It sounds like they're talking about two totally different things.
We are.
As most of the voters in Oklahoma, I mean, I hope you're not playing gotcha. I hope that you don't vote against things just because you don't want the Democrats to have a good idea, or vice versa. But how, I mean, I don't understand how we trust what you say or somebody else. I mean, do you ever feel like it is just a game of I don't want you to succeed?
Oh, no, that is very much there. I'm just telling you, Sharon, that the difficulty is in any legislative body, and I'm very much so for the House of Representatives, 435 members. Some of the bills, there are 28 different committees. Those bills work through the committees. Some of them, the first time I see them is when they get to the floor. And I look at them and they're very politically charged, and I think, okay, this is a game. I mean, this is just for show. The challenge is I have a yes or a no button at the end of the day for those. I don't have a yes, no, or change. You just have to be able to decide, do I like this more than I hate this? And what would my district best do? And how would they represent us? There are some political things that are done that are just pure show. Both parties have done it, and they are still continuing. What I've been focused in on are what are the things that can be done that actually will make a difference. We're making progress, it's just in inches. I would rather make progress in miles, but I'd rather ask the question, what can we really get done? We have a Senate that disagrees very strongly with the House. Just absolutely philosophically, we disagree. And some of the clearest examples are the jobs features. I've been in a committee, some of y'all have heard me tell the story before of being in a committee hearing with Dennis Kucinich and him going on and on about he's very uncomfortable with the way we're talking about controlling regulations, because the more we create regulations in America, the more jobs that creates in America, because companies have to hire compliance officers and regulators. And I'm sitting there waiting for him to laugh and to say, I'm just kidding. He didn't. I mean, he was just appalled that we would want to withdraw regulations because that slows down job growth. And his impression, his sense is, companies don't want to hire, so I'm going to make them hire. Well, I don't share that view at all. I think companies want to grow and want to hire, and they want to be able to expand. So we're going to have very different perspectives on that same thing. By the way, I ran into someone in Oklahoma City yesterday that said almost exactly that same thing to me, that she absolutely believed that we need to stop going after regulations because regulations is what's holding our economy together, because companies don't want to hire, so we're going to make them hire. And so issues like that, we're not going to see alike. We're not going to find a common ground. We just got to outvote each other and to be able to get it done. But there are some things like the free trade agreements. We've got to get some things done. We can't just sit around and politic for the next 14 months. We've got to get it done. Yes, sir.
Congressman, my name is Ray Vaughn. I work for Oklahoma County, and we are basically self-insured on all of our medical expense, pharmaceutical expense. We've got 1,600 very dedicated employees that provide services every day to the citizens of Oklahoma County. They haven't had a raise in 4 years. And What we experienced this year was a 23% increase in the costs of our medical expenses, largely due to federal health care and the implementation of that bill, which went into effect July 1st. I know a number of those provisions still are yet to come into effect.
A lot of them.
So my question is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Is there either on the judicial level or legislatively, what would you say is going to be the future of this federal Health Care Act?
The President's, thanks for that, by the way. The President's health care law, there are a couple different pinch points that are coming up. One is the Supreme Court. It became increasingly likely the Supreme Court would hear the case when two different courts have now been in opposition to each other in clear examples. The 26 states of the larger thing has worked its way through all the district circuit courts and such, and has been found to be unconstitutional. Other district and circuit courts have come back and said, no, it is constitutional. So there's a clear gap there. The Obama administration just this week determined that they are not going to ask the full court to be able to hear it, and so that, again, accelerates its movement to the Supreme Court. It should be in the Supreme Court by this spring. They would rule on it by June, if so. I'm one of those people that just looks at it and says, I can't find anything in the Constitution that gets close to requiring any American, if you're going to breathe in this country, you have to buy this product. That is a far extension of the Commerce Clause. There are a lot of judges that have that exact same perspective. At the end of the day, the President's health care law, as it works through the court system, has nothing to do with health. I just want you to understand that. All of the arguments in the Supreme Court will not be about insurance and health care. All of it will be about, does Congress have the capacity constitutionally to pass a law that requires all Americans to purchase a product? Can you mandate that? It's never been done before. So can that be done? So that will be the essence of the argument. I think they're going to come back and say no. I hope I'm right. Now, it depends completely on how good Justice Kennedy's breakfast was that day and to see how all that comes down. But I think it's going to be how that rolls out. The second pinch point is through the elections. The closer that we get to the election, I think the more this is going to be the issue again for 2012 in the elections. And then that means 2013, if Republicans win back the House and the Senate in the executive office, they have to be able to get something done to start unpacking some aspects of it. And it's going to have to be done quickly because most of it, the taxes, for instance, the majority of those taxes start in January 2013 for the President's health care law. And then a lot of the mandates kick in, well, a lot of them have already started, but a great majority of them are 2013, 14, 15, 16. So we've only got 2 pinch points. If both those pinch points fail, there's no turning back. And that will be the hard part. So you're welcome for the optimistic news there. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Congressman. Rick Moore of the Oklahoma Municipal Contractors
Morning.
Association. How are you this morning? I know Congress has just passed yet another continuing resolution to keep the Highway Trust Fund solvent for, another 6 months.
6 months.
Since you're on the House Transportation Committee, do you see any kind of transportation bill coming that might give us a little more stability for highway funding than what we've been having?
Oh, I certainly hope so. This is number 8. Congress, it's one of those fascinating things coming in is the neophyte freshman. You walk in, I'm on the Transportation Committee, and we work through an authorization bill. An authorization has not been done in aviation for FAA since 2007. They've done 18 continuing resolutions for that, short-term continuing resolutions. We're now number 22, short-term resolutions, when we have a bill and can't get the House and the Senate to be able to work through the final details on that. The surface transportation, same thing. We have 8 of those that have been done now that have been going on for years. We're fairly close on a lot of the issues between the House and the Senate. We have 2 big issues, which I'm sure you know well. A couple of things that we've been pushing hard on the House, we're finding some common agreement on the Senate side, which I'm very pleased at that. There are 2 ways to be able to attack the finances for surface transportation. One of them is to say, let's just allot more money to be able to get these roads done. The other one is to say, why does it cost so much now? It didn't used to cost that much before. What's driving up the cost? And I think a lot of the costs are federal regulations. The increased number of regulations and the increased amount of oversight that's happening there, and the fact that in a construction project, and you'll hear a lot of people talk about shovel-ready projects. I want you to know a shovel-ready project started 7 years ago. If it's a transportation project, it had to start 7 years ago to be shovel-ready now. because the amount of regulations that go into it and the amount of the process and permitting and everything else that has to happen. We're making multiple recommendations on that. One is for flexibility, and we're finding some common agreement with the Senate on it. There are 100 different highway programs. We're shrinking that down to about 30 and giving the states more flexibility to say, if you want to do that, you can, but if you want to do this, you can. Not, you only get the money if you're going to do sidewalks in rural communities. We want to also say, if you need to also do a bridge, you could use that money for a sidewalk in this community or a bridge, for instance. And the state is able to determine where's the best use of that dollars at that moment. So that's one feature. The second feature of it is dealing with the regulatory scheme. If you are in an existing right-of-way, we think if you're doing construction in an existing right-of-way, you shouldn't have to redo all of those same permitting all over again. You're in the existing right-of-way, do it. Do what has to be done. And it greatly accelerates that process of construction, not to have to constantly be redoing all your permitting over and over again in the lifetime of this road. The biggest issue is on the length of time and on the amount of money on it. The Senate's proposal is 2 years. Ours is 6 years in the House. The Senate's proposal is to spend out everything that's in the Highway Trust Fund completely. Ours is to spend what's coming in each year. We have $37.5 billion coming in. We're saying let's spend $37.5 billion. That's what we have coming in gas tax. You know, every time you fill up your tank, 18.4 cents of that gallon is federal gas tax. And that's supposedly returned back to the state, though we know we've been a donor state for a long time in Oklahoma until last year. But that 18.4 cents, we want to give maximum flexibility, but also be able to say that has to be able to pay for what we're doing. Senate's version has a higher dollar. Now, we'll work all those out. Let me tell you my conflicted nature on it. I'd rather have a 6-year bill because it provides a lot more stability. We have an 8-year plan in Oklahoma. They think a 6-year plan in Congress is really long. I'd like to have them come sit down with Gary Ridley here and say, let me show you what long-term planning really looks like and how this could be done. So I'd rather have a 6-year plan. But I really believe that we're going to win the Senate back next year. We have to win 5 seats. We win 5 seats. We win the Senate back. Of the 33 senators that are up for re-election, 23 of those are Democrats. This is not a year to run, as it was last year, as is panning out again, to be a Democrat running and saying, I believe in all these policies. These have led our nation well. For whatever your dynamics, and I know we have Republicans and Democrats in the room, it's going to be tough on that. So if Republicans win back the Senate, guess who is the chairman for transportation in the Senate? A gentleman named Jim Inhofe. Now, that sways me between the 2-year, 6-year plan. I think we need flexibility, but if we do 2 years, the next transportation bill in the Senate is written by Jim Inhofe. That'd be a great bill, because I know how he would handle these issues, and he would do a fine job of handling all of it, and it would be very practical, down to earth. And so we'll see where things get balanced out and how we get that done. The focus is to get something done. And we are closer than it looks on that. So much time we got. Go ahead. What time are we scheduled to be done, Carl? About 5 more minutes? Okay, about 5 more minutes. We'll go from there. I think that means you probably get the last question because I talked too long.
Thank you, Congressman. Chip Carter with Covenant. You're a member of the House Budget Committee, a member of a Republican freshman class largely elected on federal spending concerns. Talk to us a minute, if you would, about how we can address the $14 trillion in debt. And
is that a problem?
I think it's a very big problem. So, and thanks for all that you're doing.
Chip, thanks. I've got to tell you, it's the number one thing we work on all the time, Chip. Everything is connected to that. I talked to Tom Cole not long ago, and in my conversations with Tom, he said it's very interesting. The class that he was elected in was right after 9/11. And they are national security hawks, and they have stayed that way. That's just in the DNA of that class. Of the 87 freshmen that were elected this year, we're a pretty diverse group, I've got to tell you. There's not a lot we agree on once you leave debt. But the one issue the 87 of us agree on is the debt that we're accumulating as a nation is a really bad idea, and it's toxic both for our economy, for stability as a nation and long-term planning for businesses, and it's not sustainable. Let me just give you a couple of comments on it. One is the sustainability of our debt. There is an impression that we're fine with debt as long as we can make the interest payments. We pay about $220 billion a year in interest, and as long as we're making the interest payments, we're fine. Here's the concern on it. You know this well. When we say we're going to add more debt, like this year, $2 trillion more debt, we go out into the market worldwide and go compete for those investment dollars. We need $2 trillion more dollars to be able to cover our obligations as a country. And so worldwide markets and our own markets on the treasury bills and bonds and all those things, we're out there competing against companies that are trying to get money for investing in their own company. So we are literally competing against companies that need investment dollars, but we're saying as a nation, no, we need money as well. So at some point, just by the nature of us going to try to snap up another $2 trillion, less money is going into the market, less money is going into private capital investment. We're actually slowing down the economy the more money we go out on the worldwide market and try to get. The problem is every country in the world currently is doing the same thing. There is a limit, there is a point that worldwide the investment dollars are not there anymore. So interest rates begin to skyrocket because governments have got to go compete for more dollars, or people just stop buying it at the same level. And then investors get nervous about the bonds that they hold. There is a level that this reaches. We're at 100% of debt to GDP right now. 100%. The last time we were at 100% debt to GDP was World War II. The differences were, at that time, everyone knew it was short term, and also we owned our own debt. We sold war bonds. We owned our own debt. So when the interest was paid back, it was paid back to Americans, was reinvested into the American economy. Now 47% of the debt is owned by people outside the United States. We have about $110 billion a year we transfer out of our country. Two largest areas of transfer for us in our own economy, our own interest payments that we're shifting out of the country and our energy purchases outside the United States. Those two things are absolutely choking our economy by shifting money outside of the United States. So we've got to get on top of this. The problem is, how do you solve it? 55% of everything that we spend right now is in entitlement spending. Another 6%, 5 to 6% is in our interest payments. The rest of it is through what's called discretionary spending. Here's the battle that we're up against. I've had people say to me, just get up there and balance it. Just balance it. Just don't pay more. Don't borrow anymore. Don't do it. Here's what that would mean. The only way to balance next year, if we're to say this year we're out of balance, next year we're in balance. The only way to do that is if next year we shut down all military spending worldwide for every single aspect of the military and shut down every single agency of the federal government. If we shut both of those down, we had just the entitlement spending left, we would make it. By the way, we'd have to do that the next year as well. We brought in $2.2 trillion. We spent $3.7 trillion. The last 3 years in a row, we've been over $1 trillion out of balance every single year. We're spending 25% of the GDP of the United States on the federal government. 25%. We've never been like that. So we've got to get a handle on this. I do think the biggest issue that we have is not our tax rates. If you go back just 10 years ago, the amount of revenue that we're bringing in was 18.5% to 20%. We were spending about 20%. Those rates aren't the issue. It's the amount of money people are making. People are making less money, so they're paying less taxes. At the same time, we've rapidly ramped up. Now our revenue is about 15%. Our spending is about 25%. We've got to be able to get that back in balance. But that's not easy. Everyone has a project that's very important. Everyone has a plan that's very important, and everyone comes to my office and says something pretty similar. I know we've got to cut the budget, but, and then it goes from there. That's why I'm so focused on low-cost, no-cost options to be able to reinvest in the economy. If we're going to do this, we need to start looking at the things that don't cost a lot of money, that free up the economy to start making more money, to have more revenue coming in. And then we're going to have to get on top of these issues. Let me make just one side comment, and then we'll be done. We've taken quite a beating on the entitlement side, on some of the aspects, and on Medicare. I want you to know this. No one is proposing killing Social Security and Medicare. The Republican conference came out in April and said Medicare is going insolvent by the year 2018. That's not us making that up. That's the chief actuary of Medicare telling us that. The clock is ticking on Medicare, and that is with the changes that happened 2 years ago with the president's health care law. With those changes, it's now going bankrupt 5 years faster. We've got to do something to stabilize Medicare, and it can't be just tweaked around the edges. We have to be able to reform this system to make sure it continues to work. That's been the proposal. Our radical proposal that we put out of the House was to take the competition that exists in Medicare Part D and allow that competition to also exist in A and B. To take also the income testing that happens in Medicare Part B already and apply that to A and D. That's all it was. And for that, I was accused of throwing the elderly off the bridge, of all kinds of craziness. I thought, those things already exist in D and B. We're just applying it to all three programs rather than having it just this one and just this one. We're trying to find ways to be able to reform the system so it will last. Just know Medicare is going to be in the conversation, but no one's talking about cutting it for current beneficiaries. No one's talking about cutting it off entirely. Those aren't serious conversations. The serious conversation is, how do we reform this to make sure that it still exists and it still functions, especially for those who need it the most? How do we provide a safety net and make sure that safety net is still there? So you pray for us on that one. It's going to be a bloody fight, because anytime you get close to any of those programs, it draws attention. Let's put it that way. I can't wait to see what the campaign commercials are going to be running against me next year. You know, that's just the nature of it. It has to be done, because the worst thing we can do right now is do nothing and just watch it go and solve it, and everyone say, Congress, you knew this was going to happen. How come you didn't fix it? We've got to resolve it. So thanks, y'all, and please contact your office if you need anything to be able to help. So.
Thank you, Congressman. We appreciate your comments. We think you're doing a wonderful job. Each of you, thanks so much for attending. A couple of quick announcements. Maybe they'd be called advertisements. Recently, the Chamber launched its new and improved home site, okcchamber.com. Not only does the site feature a new design and content, but there are also valuable new member features. I hope each of you will take a moment to check it out. Secondly, the Chamber's annual meeting will be held this year on Thursday, December 8th. This meeting is an important time for us to gather together and review the progress made over the past year, while also looking forward and talking about our priorities for 2012. If you would like to register for this event, please see the event calendar in your program for more information. Thanks to OGE Energy and Oklahoma Christian University for being our sponsors today. Thanks each of you for coming, and we are adjourned.